name is Mario Rodriguez, and I'm head of product for the enterprise queue of GitHub. So if you have any questions and concerns about GitHub Enterprise itself, please find me after the talk. I'm very good at listening. In fact, the majority of my job is actually going out there and meeting customers and kind of translating that into a vision and strategy and the execution of the product. So thank you so much for being here. Today, before we go deeper into the talk, I just wanted to do a small recap of the announcements that we had today and kind of not alluded to this thing, the theme of the conference in reality is an interconnected community, all the way from open source, kind of bringing those open source into inner source and the enterprise, from maintainers to any type of contributor out there. The core theme is we're all interconnected in some way in this big kind of planet scale collaboration platform that is GitHub today. And he kind of joked that, there's this dogma of a developer, and you pass him pizza or some Red Bull maybe, and there's code. For me, when I went to school, actually, it was more like sessions of video games and then coding, sessions of video game and then coding. But like the reality of it is we cannot do it with the support below the waterline and with the support of everyone over here as well. So the announcements, and there's a lot. If you actually have been to other satellites, you will notice that this one is kind of action-packed. A lot of things that we announced on security. My favorite one is the Dependabot. I've been talking to Gray for a long time now, it seems, about that product, about the feature, about the love that people have with it. And then we talked a little bit about enterprise, and you can see there enterprise accounts, internal repos that is mainly for inner sourcing to our new roles and permissions and insights, all the way to community contributions and everything in GitHub sponsors. So a lot there. Again, after the talk, you could find me. I could probably talk about any of those items. If you didn't go to the other talks, I want to get more details, then we could actually do that as well. So that's kind of a summary of it. So within enterprise, for us in enterprise, it actually starts with trust. That's the majority of the conversations that I go into. There's a little bit about features. There's a little bit about transformation. There's a lot about trust as well. So some stats for you. 50% of the global Fortune 100 actually uses GitHub Enterprise. EMEA specifically, what we call kind of Europe, has seen 2.5x growth on GitHub Enterprise. It's one of our strongest markets. And then we've done a lot when it comes to security and vulnerabilities. You can see a little bit there about tokens discovered in public repos, 28 million, which is kind of interesting that we discover secrets 28 million times, but we're actually adding value, and hopefully that number continues to go down, not up. That's one of the metrics that we actually try to not increase instead of, because we're probably not doing the right thing at the end. So we'll give you more features in there too for that. So the talk today, it's about scale, but you might be asking yourself, okay, Mario, you have two kind of ways to deploy GitHub Enterprise today. You have the server product and you have the cloud product. When it comes to the cloud, we manage all of the scaling for you, all of the auto scaling. So we could probably spend 5 milliseconds on that, and maybe after that, we'll have to talk about Bitcoin's price or something else. So then on server, there's a little bit more. But to tell you the truth, I don't know how many of you guys know this, but we ship GitHub Server in an appliance. And it's pretty easy to maintain. In fact, I actually set up as well and manage and all of that. In fact, I was talking to one of our customers yesterday, and when they started adopting, they were like, no, there's no way that all we have to do is kind of put it over here, hit this button, and it's up. And that's it. And it took them longer, actually, to research that we were telling the truth, that it took them to set up the appliance. So it's pretty easy. So the talk is really not about how to scale up your infrastructure and all of those type of things. There's a lot of great content out there on it. What I really want to talk about when it comes to scale is really how to scale your organization and the practices of your organization on GitHub. So there's three things that when I go to an enterprise, I get asked continuously about. One is, we want to use more open source. How can we do that effectively? How can we both consume and how can we contribute more effectively. In fact, one of the, the features that a lot of people want right now is just being able to actually take a public repo and then put it in a GitHub instance server on premises and have that fork actually work very well. But they want to consume, they want to utilize, and they want to contribute in a seamless way with open source. And how can you actually do that at scale? Really, with one repo, it works, but how can you do it at scale? What are the things that need to happen to do that? Then there's collaboration and inner source. How should I actually be setting up the structure of my GitHub Enterprise internally to allow collaboration to foster? I was talking to another customer. They had 3 servers. Very hard for actual collaboration to happen in 3 different servers with 3 different set of identities and all of that. And then the last one is, how can we do all of this in a way that really has that security and compliance? Because I am an enterprise, I had to pass audits, I have to show a set of people that we're doing this the right way. I have to understand if there's a breach. There's a lot more that ends up going in at enterprise that needs to be met that you don't get that maybe at the OSS, the maintainers level as much. So kind of my life revolves around making a set of, listening, trying to figure out what everyone is doing, trying to make sure there's a set of best practices around it. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today is what are those set of best practices that we're recommending as you try to kind of scale the amount of people that end up using GitHub and kind of within those 3 pillars and themes. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of talk about the core structure of how GitHub thinks about an enterprise. And really, there's a couple of slides over here that are really, really important. Some of them you're not going to agree with. And again, I'm very good at listening and taking that. But this is what we see as best practices out there. So the first thing, and this is new, and we did it because it was needed to actually tell their story, is that we introduced the concept of an enterprise account. And that enterprise account actually ends up being able to manage a set of organizations that are at the bottom. So if you think about GitHub Enterprise in the cloud, you might have multiple orgs. In fact, there's very good reasons to have multiple orgs in an organization. And you want to kind of manage them holistically, but you had no construct, no way of doing that in a way that was, a lot of people kind of wrote scripts and then hit our APIs and did a bunch of hacks because we're all hackers, we're all developers, but there was actually nothing helping them. And we needed to step in and help them, and the enterprise account is that. So when should you then have organizations? We get asked this a lot as well, which is, should I have 1 org? Should I have 2 orgs? Should I have 50 orgs or 1,000 orgs? And what we usually say is the following. We don't want you to map an org to a product. We see sometimes that a lot, like, OK, I have a product, let me just do an org for it. That's probably not the right granularity level for it. An org should be something like a division within your company or a set of things that are grouped together in some type of theme. So a set of products are grouped together in some type of theme ends up then creating that organization. And again, sometimes we see that as divisions within the company, business units. Sometimes they could be very, very small. Sometimes they could be big. There are times that you want to keep things completely private, and having an org that allows you to do that and have discoverability of everything within it. And sometimes we see these org names in GitHub.com that are like, 1, 2, 3, F78, and I'm like, okay, that's probably some secret project that they're trying to do. But organizations, think about it as business units, is kind of a theme of, that puts together a set of products. So an enterprise account, and today you could get one if you talk to your account representative you bought, and you have GitHub Enterprise, there's a way for you to actually try that out. And then organizations. We also introduced, which I don't think we showed, I wanted to demo for you guys, but we have no way of doing demos in the stage. But this is what we call in kind of admin center for that enterprise account. So what you see in here is all of the organizations that belong to this enterprise. None of them have, we love avocados at GitHub, so there's a bunch of things within that theme there. And you see all of the organizations. You're going to see the description, a little bit more metadata. This is kind of raw on purpose. You also see people on the left-hand side there. So you're going to be able, as an administrator of the enterprise, you're going to be able to go into that people tab and see every member across all of those orgs and repos that you have in your organizations, every member of them. And we dedupe them and all of those type of things. And then you're also going to be able to manage who are your enterprise admins, who are your billing admins, and a couple of other things like that. But that people tab, if you have an auditor coming in and says, who has access to GitHub, you could probably go to that people tab, and those people have access to GitHub. So that's that. The other thing that you see in it is this concept of policies. And right now is the beginning of what kind of the vision of policy at GitHub is at the enterprise level. But think about, like, you have some SDLC or software lifecycle management, and you want to start implementing a set of best practices and a set of policies on it. We're going to allow you to do that at the enterprise level, have that cascade nicely to your entire set of organizations. There will be a set of things where, maybe it cannot apply to these orgs. It should only be to these ones. We'll allow that in the future as well. But the idea of that is we're going to start bringing policy at the enterprise level and allow the central teams that actually do DevOps practices, architecture, and all of those things to be able to do that at a central level and then provide for usage to all of the organizations and repos underneath. We're very excited about that, and we could geek out later on everything that is there. And the last thing is just a set of settings, normal stuff that allows you to maybe implement single sign-on at the enterprise level, manage billings, manage webhooks, and things like that. So that's that. So what about beneath the organization? How should we be thinking about it? The way that we explain it usually is there are two main constructs that you should be thinking about. There are products, and there are people working on those products. Like, those are the main two things that you should be optimizing for inside an organization. So repos usually map to products. Now, there's many of you that actually practice microservices, and they might have multiple repos per product, and that's perfectly fine. Please don't make it 100 repos per product. I've seen that a lot. Try to keep it kind of sane at the end there. But think about repos or a set of repos for a product. I know GitHub today, especially in the enterprise product, doesn't give you a lot of constructs to group a set of repos together and actually do something with them. But know that we've been hearing that feedback, and there's an area of investment. But again, one repo per product or a set of repos per product. And then we want you to represent the people working on those products by actually utilizing the team construct. So many enterprises actually don't utilize it, and it's one of the best features we have, and we'll continue investment on that, that allows a significant amount of value. So think about, okay, maybe there are squads, maybe they're feature teams, whatever you kind of want to think about them. So you put them in a team, and those are the people actually within that, and then you add those teams into the repos, and now you allow the collaboration to happen that way. So enterprise account, I probably have a summary slide. Okay. So the core structure essentially then is this: an enterprise account for everything managed. By the way, in GHE server, so that's our on-premises queue, you also have this concept of an enterprise account, and then you're going to be able to use it. So if you go to 2.7, to our GHES release of 2.17, which you just announced today, then you're going to be able to see an enterprise account in it. You're going to be able to see all of the orgs that belong on it, and then kind of play with some of these features as well. In addition to that, you could even connect that enterprise account on your server to an enterprise account in the cloud and allow kind of collaboration to happen that way. That's through a GitHub Connect feature that we shipped last year. And there's more, we improved it, we added more features, and there's more value coming later in that too. So we're pretty excited about that. So enterprise account, organizations to group products, teams to group people working on those products, and then kind of repos for your products. So that's kind of like what we call the core for GitHub. And there are times you should deviate from this, but please, the majority of the time, if you do this, as we add features to the product, you're going to get a significant amount of value for free because you're kind of matching what we determined to be the best practice out there. OK, so after you've done that, then I want you to think about layering identity on top of what we said. This is one of the hardest things at GitHub sometimes, is how do you do identity management? And there's a lot for us to improve. It keeps me up at night at times. But start by layering identity on top of it. And what do we do by that? We want you actually to use, even though a developer and every GitHub member uses a GitHub account, that's perfectly fine. But in the cloud, that GitHub account actually follows them through jobs. It's kind of like, for the majority of the time, it serves as the resume as a developer. So if I started on company A, then I moved to B, to C, to D, as an employer of D, you're going to be able to kind of see, okay, he worked in all of these things. These are the contributions to open source and all of that. So kind of the GitHub account follows the human around, right? But the reality is the credentials to access the resources of an organization does not. So if I was at company A and they assign me an identity with an email and I have a password for that, it's very different than my GitHub one. Whenever I actually leave that company, then my identity kind of disappears from that. Those credentials, I can no longer use them, right? Because I'm no longer working at that company. So think about it the same way. Like, I want you to think about that enterprise account as your company. And I want you to then hook that up through SAML to actually the identity provider that you have in your organization. The identity provider that determines, okay, this is this human, but within this org. And it's very different than their personal account, right? And these are really the credentials to access everything that, let's say, Avocado Corp has. So if you do that, then every time I try to access anything within an organization, I'm going to get SSO. I'm going to get single sign-on with that identity provider. And then I could then put the credentials of Avocado Corp in it, and then I'm in. And if I want to go and do something else in an open source project, they're not going to ask me for those credentials. So I'm going to be using just my GitHub account and kind of the information that carries. So again, layer identity at the enterprise layer. Before we had it at the organization, now we're making it super easy to do it at the enterprise. Then after that, I want you to think about, we recently released a feature to allow member synchronization into a team. So I layer that, I layer identity at the enterprise level. And then after that, then what I want you to do is say, usually if you have an application, what you want to do is you want to go to your identity providers in a group. It's usually a security group. You add the developer. And by doing that, they get access to maybe GitHub. They may get access to Jira, some Jenkins stuff, some other kind of providers that you have, to network shares, to a lot of entitlements at the end. And you're managing all of that through one group. And it's great, actually. It's great for auditability, because now you know that if I remove that person from that group, they lose access to that application and everything. It's not just GitHub, but it loses access to every other service as well. So we want to participate as part of that ecosystem. So one of the things that we released on May 7th, and now we're making publicly available in a beta format, is the ability to sync membership from that identity provider group into a GitHub team. So again, when you add that person in, it automatically gets added to the team. They have access to what they needed to. When that person leaves that team and then goes to another group within your company, if they actually left the company, that's easier because there's other ways to deprovision the user. But let's say that person doesn't need access anymore. You remove them from a team. We have a background job that ends up doing the sync. And then we remove them from that team, and they don't have access then to those repos anymore. So think about it that way. So I want you to lay your identity at the top and kind of separate the credentials of your organization from the GitHub account at the end. I don't want you to force that human to create 2 GitHub accounts. One is not very nice for them. And the other thing is it's just not sustainable to do. So I want you to just think about, put SSO on it and use the credentials of your organization. And then do team sync. It would actually save you a lot of time. And that's why we did that feature. OK, then third thing is kind of think a lot about access control and what are the roles that you're going to support. Today, we announced 2 new roles, the triage role. And think about triage as, you don't get commit access. And it's not, the majority of the time, people think it's about trust. And it's not about trust. It's not like that person doesn't trust them, although there's probably a lot of developers in my team that don't trust me to actually have right access to a repo. We have one of them over here. But it's the majority of the time, it's not really about trust. It's really about scenarios. Like if you're, for example, if you're a maintainer and you want to get help from someone to triaging issues, being able to actually do labels and things like that, you want to extend that to them. because that's what they're going to be mainly doing, and they don't need access. It's kind of like separation of concerns a little bit, right? They don't need access to it. Like, it's very scenario-driven. Same thing in the enterprise. Some like project managers might need access to actually manage all of the issues of the project, but they don't really need commit access at the end. And then maintain, think about as a senior developer. I know Dana joked about deleting repos, and she's probably done it a few times in her life, but it's really about kind of editing descriptions, being able to maintain a set of things, force push into a branch. There's a set of permissions in it. Right now we're in beta, so there's 3 of them coming in, and then 3 after once we GA the feature. But think about access control and roles. You could envision that the next step for us to do is to really provide you the way to do custom roles and have full control of it. So if you're following the core structure, and then when we introduce a set of features to allow more granular permissions and fine-grained permissions, then you're going to be able to use those features very seamlessly. So think about your access control. Majority of the time, be thinking about them as RBAC or roles. It kind of simplifies the model a lot, but we'll give you flexibility if you don't want to actually think about it that way too. So just a quick then summary on everything we discussed. SAML with single sign-on at the enterprise. IDP with 2FA. Another thing, actually, I was in a conversation with another customer today. What we're seeing right now in the industry is that people are not relying on GitHub to do 2FA. They're relying on their identity provider to do that 2FA. So when you're setting up SAML and single sign-on, if your identity provider allows 2FA, you automatically get 2FA support on it. You don't have to enable that at GitHub. That actually makes it super hard for that developer because now they have to 2FA twice, essentially, to get into an organization's resource. So you want to enable 2FA, which is two-factor, at the identity provider. So Azure AD, Okta, Auth0, like all of them, I think, support it. You could even hook up with an app like Duo or with a service like Duo, for example, that supports it at the end as well. So please, think about it not at the GitHub level. Think about it at the identity provider. There's a lot of other features and identity provider supports you. External collaborators are tricky. We're not doing anything right now on it, but I will tell you, like every time I go into an enterprise, it's probably a 5 to 10 minute conversation about external collaborators and what we should be doing there. The thing that I will tell you towards the future is have a way to represent them. Many people actually don't even have a way to say, here's the query that will give me all of the external collaborators that I want to have. In it, like things just happen by default. And we want to provide a little bit more support to make sure that external collaborators are getting that value, but they're not actually getting access to the wrong things in your organization. So, and the only way we're going to be able to provide that value to you guys is if you have a way to say, these are the external collaborators, or the inverse of it and say, these are all the people that I trust in a given boundary that are not the external collaborators. So think about them. You'll hear more from us in the coming months on that. Set up your team synchronization with your IDP and understand access roles. So open source. There are 2 ways to think about open source. And in my opinion, it's not a religious debate, but like both sides have an equally good argument on this. I see 2 core ways to set it up in an enterprise, specifically when you're in the cloud, right? Because open source on server, that doesn't really mean anything because there's no community in there for that. So that's more like inner source. But you could create one org, which is your brand, where all of your OSS projects are going to be. So again, you have an enterprise account, but you have one org that is going to be your branded OSS org, right? All of the projects that want to be OSS need to be there. So that's one path. That path, actually, I've seen it be extremely successful and scale very well for the most part. Then there's another one that you could utilize too, which is, no, like I don't want that central management. I want to just say, I have an org. I want to just put a public repo. So if I have 5 orgs and I have 5 public repos for open source, then I have 5 orgs and 5 public repos. It could actually work as well. There are ways that you could, at the org level, say, repo admins do not have the ability to take a project public. They need to pass through the org owner. So there's ways to actually do that the right way. The thing that I have found is 2 kind of items that become interesting over here. One is that once you have a lot of orgs, this system starts getting a little bit not as systemic as it should be. And number two, the customer itself ends up going through a lot of brands of your company to be able to then to interact with your company. And some people are good with branding their open source repos and stuff. Some people are, or their organizations. Some people are not, and things like that. So if you ask me, the one with the hearts is usually the one that I recommend. But I'm perfectly fine in the sunshine as well, although I get burned from not having her. But so the other thing that we're seeing more and more is the ability to actually have a program that allows you to scale open source in an enterprise, and that's usually called the OSPO office. And in fact, in the flight here, I was reading an article, and that's what I just put. I had to change the slide in the flight, but there was a CDNet article where there's a person at a company that is trying to standardize and get that company to embrace open source a lot more, and we see that a lot. And the only way that they were able to make it successful is by actually having a program office for it. So if you're in an enterprise and you don't have a program office and you want to use and both consume and contribute to open source, think about creating a programs office on it. Jeff McAfee from GitHub is here. He used to run the program office at Microsoft. He has a ton of information on how to take a company that many people thought that hated open source to what it is today, which is one of the biggest contributors of open source. So, and then the last thing is kind of what open source are you using, right? So right now I'm just showing over here some of the org insights on the open source that you're using. But another thing is kind of figuring out what you have. And this is not actually the long-term right view for what GitHub should be providing. But it's kind of like the closest thing that we have, but it's a dual thing. It's what open source are you using, what's everything that is being open source, and being able to actually figure out, how can you improve on both sides of the equation. So kind of be thinking about that. There's a lot more APIs that we need to give you to be able to do that effectively. But if you want to increase open source, have an open source program office, and then figure out exactly how much you're consuming and how much you're actually contributing as well. So that's that. And we only have 8 minutes, so time goes by fast, so I go faster. So inner source, so we announced internal repos today. So the way I want you to think about it in the cloud today, if you were using GitHub Enterprise Cloud, you had only two visibility, private or you had public. Public means open source. Everyone can see it. There was nothing like Shopify said, we want to be open by default. There was no way for them to do that unless they hacked everything around it by creating this team and then having everyone in a repo on it and all of that. So what we're doing right now is enabling every company that wants to do open by default to do that by just saying, you know what, every repo that should get started, especially frameworks and things like that, should be internal by default. And that means everyone in your enterprise can see it. You don't need to add them as members or anything like that. That person can fork the repo, can contribute pull requests. If that person leaves the company, we delete the fork from their personal account. So everything kind of is covered on it. But this is kind of the foundation of what we're calling inner source. An inner source at scale at a company. A lot more planned on this area, so we're super excited to actually take the first step towards it in our cloud product today. One thing that I did go over there, match incentives to code reuse. We've seen a lot of companies say we're open by default, but their culture does not incentivize at all, meaning me, a developer, will get paid more if I don't reuse that if I would reuse, right? So you do have to think a little bit about culture when it comes to inner sourcing. So just don't think about it as, oh, okay, we have internal repos, not everything is gravy. And then the other thing is organization insights. And what this allows you to do is kind of understand, many people buy GitHub in order to transform, right? Like GitHub is not really just a Git repository, management. There's plenty of them out there. And to tell you the truth, GitHub Enterprise is a premium product. So if you're going to compare the pricing, we're not even going to be close to some of the people just offering Git hosting. So we're really a platform, and it's planet scale, but it's really a a collaboration platform at the end that offers significantly more than just raw SCM. So many people, when they adopt GitHub, what they want to see is a transformation of their practices. There's a set of them that don't do code reviews for example, and they want to, or do them in only 2 teams, and they want to kind of say everyone should be using them, and this is the way kind of going forward, pull requests, code reviews, and all of that. So this allows you to actually get insights on it. Another thing that we've been very surprised by how people are thinking about is top languages that across all of the repos they use. So what this allows you to do is say, you know what, there's some people actually using Rust, or Rust is gaining traction in my organization. I should probably hire more Rust developers, right? Like, I should get ahead of that talent curve as much as possible, so if they leave the company, I could still, manage my applications. So, so from an inner source perspective, please use that internal repo visibility. Think about humans like incentives. All of us do. We're motivated both intrinsic and non-intrinsic ways. And then foster internal communities. And then understand how everything is getting used from a GitHub perspective. So last thing, actually 2 more things. Security and compliance. I talked a little bit about the admin center at the enterprise level. There is a feature there that is pretty powerful, which is hooks. So you could actually end up subscribing to hooks and get notified about events across all of your organizations. So you don't have to have now one app installed in each one of them. You don't have to configure every time you set up an org to actually be able to receive those hooks. You could just do it at the enterprise level, collect that data. Eventually, we'll hook up that with actions and allows you to actually do something from an SDLC perspective. Enforce policy from that central location, that admin center, and then it allows you to see all of the people as well. Another feature that was not announced, you didn't see it in there, but is also new, and we're very excited about it, is our audit log API. We added this mainly for those cyber teams and those compliance scenarios. So now you're going to have an API against cloud that is going to give you a bunch of rich data about the events that happen within our organization. And we added a lot of metadata there. So we're going to publish a little bit more and set of best practices on how you should be thinking about that. But monitor your audit log. That's a good practice. New API with lost metadata is an announcement that we made today. And then alert and have a remediation plan when you have alerts. So if someone, and you see some activity sometimes that someone used, let's say, a path against a repo, and they downloaded it, and then 20 seconds later, they try to download all the repos in your organization. Like, you should be able to detect that very quickly and figure out a way to remediate. In fact, we also released, as part of the enterprise work, an API to revoke a path anytime you see it being used in a way that is malicious. And we'll have a way now to disable that path across all of the repos in your organization as well. So play around with this, give us feedback. We also talked a little bit about, from a security perspective, about dependencies, getting insight on those dependencies, making use of kind of automatic fixes and all of that. You could go with what GitHub provides you. We have 2 great partners in Wisesource and Sneak as well that can, are actually be able to provide a little bit more security on your dependency management. So, but the biggest thing for me to stress on that is get clean and stay clean. That's one of the things that enterprises struggle a lot with. That is super important as you go forward, and you want to scale it across. Then the last things is GitHub Server. I do have a couple of slides on this. What I would tell you is our appliance set loves this IO. Like, it consumes them like incredible amounts of time. So if you're going to be resource constrained at the appliance at any point, it's probably going to be your disk. So buy the best SSDs that you could buy at this moment, or deploy to the cloud. Cloud providers usually start getting better and better about their SSD throughput. It allows you to actually scale as well. But this IO, so if you have a GitHub Enterprise server, this IO is going to be the best thing. Don't make your developers actually have slow experiences. GitHub invests a lot of sweat and tears on actually being the most performant application out there, and it's because without this, you're not going to be able to provide that experience to your developers internally. So please buy good SSDs; they're not that expensive. And then take advantage of our built-in monitoring and alerting. A lot of people don't know that we have built-in monitoring in the appliance, and then end up doing all of these things that are redundant. So please take advantage, read those help docs, and do the right thing there. And then the last thing is high availability. GitHub, for the majority of the enterprises, it cannot be down. Like, an hour down of GitHub means at times millions of dollars in developer spend. One of our customers has 70,000, users on one of these appliances. So it cannot be down. High availability is super important. So there's 2 stages on that. One of them is nothing to do with high availability, but it's like, have a set of backups. Please test those backups as well. So if an event happens, you have a way to have a run book and be able to restore that and all of that. Quarterly is perfect. If you don't like quarterly, twice a year is good too. Or use our high availability setup to protect against software crashes and anything that could happen within the appliance, and understand how to actually do that failover. That's what we see the most at times for our successful customers, is how to actually do a high availability with one active, and one that is just on standby. It's not really active, but it's on standby. You have to do a couple of other things and then bring that up at the same time. It uses replication. We're pretty proud of the work there. We need to continue to improve that. We're never done with those type of features. And we are out of time. So thank you so much for everything. So it's 35 minutes. I walked you through a lot of it. Happy to talk to you after about anything that is top of mind for you. So thanks.